Hey, have you ever seen this devilishly handsome fellow before? I don't know about you, but aside from being roguishly good looking, he looks like he's very, very intelligent. Oh, okay, stop it, all of you. It's just me. This is a thumbnail that I did from a video very early on in the days of this channel, where I was discussing rumors that were being floated that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might challenge sitting President Joe Biden in the Democratic primary to seek the party's nomination to run for president. Now, that was back in March. Things have heated up since then. Take a look at this. This comes to us from our friends over at CNN. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. files paperwork to run for president as a Democrat. That was 2 weeks ago. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we got the coup de grace 2 days ago. Take a listen to this.
I've come here today to announce my candidacy for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States.
Now, most other people in life would be very humble at a moment like this. I, on the other hand, am not. And I would not. And I don't know that I ever will be. You want to know why? Because I never get tired of being right. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Well, now that all the rumor has been put to bed and we know for sure that Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to challenge President Joe Biden in the Democratic primary, that begs a whole host of questions. And aren't you glad that you ran into the wise guy in the wide brim to be able to provide you with the info and all the takes that are out there to be heard? So, what do we know about RFK Jr.? Well, he sounds like a typical Democrat from 40 or 50 years ago. Hang on, and we'll get into all that here in just a second. Now, when I say that Robert Kennedy Jr. sounds like your typical Democrat from 40 or 50 years ago, I think when you start to hear where he's at on the issues, you'll begin to understand why. Take a look at some of this. This comes directly from Robert Kennedy Jr.'s campaign website, and I want to show you 2 or 3 different things from what he calls his priorities. Let's start first with the question of honest government. From his website, a democratic government is supposed to be of, by, and for the people, but government institutions have betrayed our trust. The intelligence agencies spy on our own people. Government and tech platforms conspire to survey and censor the public. Regulatory agencies have been captured by those they're supposed to regulate. Wall Street controls the SEC. Polluters and extractive industries dominate the EPA and BLM. Pharma controls CDC, NIH, and FDA. Big Ag controls the USDA. Big Tech has captured the FTC. No wonder trust in our government is at all-time lows. It's time we earn it back. And let's also go down to the question of peace. This one's very interesting. In the long term, a nation's strength does not come from its armies. America spends as much on weaponry as the next 9 nations combined, yet the country has grown weaker, not stronger, over the last 30 years. Even as its military technology has reigned supreme, America has been hollowing out from the inside. We cannot be a strong or secure nation when our infrastructure, industry, society, and economy are infirm. A high priority of the Kennedy administration will be to make America strong again. When the body is sick, it withdraws its energy from the extremities in order to nourish the vital organs. As president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will start the process of unwinding empire. We will bring the troops home. We will stop racking up an unpayable debt to fight for one war after another. The military will return to its proper role of defending the homeland. We will end proxy wars, bombing campaigns, covert operations, coups, paramilitaries, and everything else that has become so normal most people don't even know it's happening. But it is happening, a constant drain on our strength. It's time to come home and restore this country. And one last one, folks. civil liberties. Take a listen to this. Freedom of speech is the capstone of all other rights and freedoms. Once a government has the power to silence its opponents, no other right is safe. We will therefore dismantle the censorship industrial complex in which big tech censors, deplatforms, shadow bans, and algorithmically suppresses any person or opinion the government asks them to. We will respect the right to privacy and freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures by ending mass surveillance of American citizens and the abuse of civil asset forfeiture. We will make sure that the COVID-era suspension of the right to assembly, trial by jury, and freedom of worship will never happen again. For the same right to property, during COVID, 3.4 million businesses were forced to close. Many of them, including 60% of black-owned businesses, will never reopen. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like any Democrat that I've heard about today. This sounds like the party of his uncle John. This sounds like the party of his father in the late 1960s. This sounds like Ted Kennedy up and through the late 70s into the early 80s. If this debate is actually allowed to happen, that Joe Biden gets on stage with RFK Jr., it is game on. I will pay the money. I'd probably go sit on the front row to watch this. It's going to be just that interesting. Because if you take the positions of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and then you contrast them with the current modern Democratic Party, we's about to have a come to Jesus meeting if these two ever get on the same stage together, and I am praying that it happens. I tell you what, now there's some things that Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to stand for that I can't agree with. Mostly on the question of abortion, mostly on a few other things. But I'll tell you what, you go down the line with that, and I may be a recovering Republican who is a conservative by nature, but I'll tell you what, I can get down with this guy. Which makes what he's doing inside the Democratic Party even more interesting. Hang on, we're going to get into a question of some polling that's come out, talk about a few other things, and then we'll get into where this goes from here. So it's only been 2 days since Robert Kennedy Jr. has announced that he's going to run against Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. What kind of effect is it having? Is there any polling out there that gives us some idea of what a Kennedy jumping into this race in the same way his Uncle Ted jumped into the 1980 Democratic primary against Jimmy Carter? Do we have an idea of what the effect may be? Well, it's early, but it could very well be this is shaking up the Democratic primary in 2024. Take a look at this. This comes from Breitbart. 32% of Biden voters back another Democrat or undecided in the primary. Look at this. This is from yesterday, article written by Nick Gilbertson. Just under a third of Joe Biden's 2020 voters either support an already declared Democrat candidate or are undecided about who they would vote for in the primary. The poll that is being referenced in this article comes from Suffolk USA Today poll, and it shows that 67% of Democrats who voted for Biden in 2020 want the president to win the Democratic Party nomination. Now, let's break this down for just a second. You hear that number and you read, well, yeah, 67% of Democrats want Joe Biden to be the nominee. They want him to win re-election. Yeah, and that also means that 33% want somebody else. Now, is that going to be enough by itself right now to change the outcome of the Democratic primaries in 2024 if the vote were tomorrow? Of course not. But number one, there's time between then and now. Number two, the chance for Kennedy to raise money. And number three, something could conceivably go even more wrong than is already going wrong in the Joe Biden presidency. Now, going back to that poll for a second, take a look at this. 67% support Biden. 14% already are declaring for Robert Kennedy Jr., with 5% going to Marianne Williamson, who is another declared candidate in this race. Now, what makes up the Kennedy vote? Well, here's a poll. We'll take a look at it real quick that came out. This is an article in unheard.com written by James Billett. 1 in 10 Democrats support RFK Jr. A little bit different than the Suffolk poll, but keep in mind this comes from Morning Consult. 2 different pollsters, 2 different results. It's not so much the 10% or the difference between the 2 polls I want to look at, as much as I want to take a look at what makes up the RFK Jr. support. There we go. All right, now you'll notice something. According to this Morning Consult poll, RFK Jr. is getting 10% overall. But if you look, he's getting about 7% of men, 13% of women. Notice the age ranges here. Between 18 and 44, RFK Jr. is getting about 15%. Between the ages of 45 and 65 plus, he's getting 26. Remember what I said, the name Kennedy inside the Democratic Party still has some kick to it, particularly among older Democrats, and you can start to see it in this poll. He's getting 8% of the black vote, and look at without college, 12%, college grad, 10. That sounds very similar to the coalition that made up his dad's support back in 1968. Now, a lot of you are sitting out there saying, well, yeah, but Joe Biden's going to win comfortably. Yeah, but there's something that these numbers reveal that most people are not willing to pay attention to. People don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee. I'm going to reference back to a poll that I talked about in my very first video about the RFK bid. Take a look at this. Now, this was from back in February. Biden 2024, most Democrats say no thank you, according to an Associated Press NORC poll. Look at this number. A majority of Democrats now think one term is plenty for President Joe Biden, despite his insistence that he plans to seek re-election in 2024. According to a new poll from the Associated Press, NORC Center for Public Affairs Research shows that just 37% of Democrats say they want him to seek a second term, down from 52% in the weeks before last year's midterm election. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to remind everybody of something when it comes to Joe Biden. Joe Biden historically has never been popular inside the Democratic Party. You go back to his 1988 race, he had to drop out before the primaries even started because of the plagiarism scandal, among other reasons. Go to 2008, he dropped out before the New Hampshire primary because he got a measly 1% in Iowa. Go to 2020, he got his butt kicked in Iowa, he got his butt kicked in New Hampshire, got his butt kicked in the Nevada caucuses. Then when it finally got down to South Carolina, the only two things that really saved him were Jim Clyburn's endorsement and Barack Obama clearing the field, trying to get everybody else out of the race. That's the only two things that really in the end got him the nomination. Democrats didn't want Joe Biden, they just wanted rid of Donald Trump. And Joe Biden happened to be the vessel that allowed them to do it. Now, I bring all that up to bring up this. It doesn't matter whose polls you're looking at. Yes, Biden is ahead in a conventional Democratic primary, but keep this in mind. All of that anti-Biden support is broken down among a whole bunch of candidates. The names that get thrown into these polls are Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, etc. But if all that anti-Biden vote consolidates behind one candidate, this could make for some really interesting Democratic primaries, and Robert Kennedy Jr. could be just that candidate. Now, granted, his views on some things are out of step with the current Democratic Party of today, but there is enough idealism, there is enough there that he could wind up pulling together the old Kennedy coalition, and if that happens, Joe Biden could get the scare of his life. Now, do I think Joe Biden would probably still win the Democratic primaries? Absolutely. But there is one other aspect about this that's not being talked about, and we'll get into that in just one second. A moment ago that I think that Joe Biden is still going to win the Democratic primary against Robert Kennedy Jr. Even though I am an eternal optimist, and I must admit there's a lot about Kennedy's platform that I really like, I think the machinery is in place for Joe Biden to win re-election in the Democratic primaries and defend his incumbency. But that said, there is a point to be made that I don't think a lot of people are considering. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that on average, Robert Kennedy Jr. gets anywhere from 15 to 25% of the Democratic vote in each state where a primary or a caucus is held. Well, even if Joe Biden wins the Democratic nomination to seek the presidency again, that 15 to 25% isn't going anywhere. which begs an even bigger question for the general election. Where is that 15 to 25% in each state going to go? Now, no one has really brought it up much yet. It's been hinted at by some people. But if you take the positions of Robert Kennedy Jr. and you take the positions of Donald Trump, on certain issues, there's a lot of similarity. Bringing the troops home, taking on the deep state, working on infrastructure, making sure that we have a justice system that treats all people equally. Now, they may disagree in practice about how to get to those goals, but RFK Jr. and Donald Trump share a lot of the same goals in principle, which begs the million-dollar question. If Robert Kennedy can bring his issues to the fore inside the Democratic primary, and those voters not going to be able to get the chance to vote for RFK Jr., where are they going to go? Could they wind up voting for Donald Trump? Now, I don't think a lot of them will. They'll probably either go to a third-party candidate, maybe the Libertarian or the Green candidate, or, they might vote for Trump. But let's stop and consider something. Let's just be generous to Trump and say that, 5% of Democratic voters who voted for RFK in the primaries will give their vote to Donald Trump in each state. Well, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Biden didn't win some of those states in 2020 by very much. Arizona by about 10,000, maybe a little bit less. Wisconsin by 20,000. Georgia by 11, and on down the line. If just enough of RFK voters vote for Donald Trump in the general election, you could wind up swinging a number of states and thereby give Donald Trump the presidency again. And this is what's scaring Biden and his people to death. They're never going to say it publicly, but they know this could very well happen. They're going to do everything they can to marginalize RFK Jr. They're going to not want to listen to his message. They're not going to want, Biden and his people are not going to want to see Robert Kennedy Jr. on the same stage with him anywhere. They're going to do their dead level best to ignore him like he's got some form of leprosy and walk on the other side of the street to get away from him. I don't think RFK Jr. is going to let that happen. Now, this could get really interesting. So, he's in. We'll see what happens. And that also, one last thing. Lest you think that I'm wrong about the effect that RFK Jr. is having on Biden and his people right now, take a look at this. This is a tweet that's put out by Simon Ateba, who is the chief White House correspondent for Today News Africa. The tweet reads, "Will you vote for him? Breaking. President Joe Biden to announce his bid for a second term next week. According to sources, the 80-year-old president and his team will release a campaign video on April 25th, marking 4 years since the 2020 campaign launch." Now, the reason that I say this could be evidence that RFK Jr. is already getting to Biden, keep in mind, Biden's been saying it for weeks. Well, I intend to announce, but I'm going to do it a little bit later on. Well, now all of a sudden, if what is being reported by Atiba is true, Biden and his people have moved up the timetable. RFK announces on Wednesday, the 18th of April, and now, 7 days later, Joe Biden's going to announce officially he's running. You can't tell me that this is not in large part brought about by the fact that the son of some very famous Democrats has now decided to challenge the sitting Democrat president. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but man, does it rhyme, so says the saying. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? As we get ready to wrap this up, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you are not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. Number two, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when we've got a new video coming out. Number three, if you have friends of yours that you think would enjoy this content, please share the video around. I would love to get as many subscribers viewing this channel as is possible. And finally, please give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.